On October 25th, 1994, Susan Smith filed a police report that a black man carjacked her 1990 Mazda Protege and kidnapped her two children still in the rear seat. For 9 days, she would appear on national TV, begging and crying for the safe return of her children. After further investigation, she would be arrested and found guilty of their murder. Hello, and welcome to History's a Disaster. I'm your host, Andrew, and tonight we dive into the Susan Smith case. This lying bitch deceived the nation while preying on racist stereotypes after she murdered her children. Around 9 p.m. on October 25th, Susan Smith would appear on the doorstep of Shirley McLeod, who lived about a quarter of a mile from John D. Long Lake. She was screaming and crying hysterically. After Shirley spoke with Susan, 911 was immediately called. When Union County Sheriff Howard Wells arrived, she would claim that while stopped at the red light on Monarch Mills, a black man hopped in her car and put a gun to her side and told her to shut up and drive. After 5 miles of driving along 49, he told her to stop the car and get out. She asked and begged to get her sons, but the man said he didn't have time for that and promised he wouldn't hurt them. He then pushed her out of the car and drove off with 3-year-old Michael and 14-month-old Alex still strapped in the back. This would soon get national attention. The media would descend on the small town of Union, South Carolina. All the major news outlets wanted in on this story. The carjacking of a white woman by a black male highlighted the fear that black men were a danger to white women everywhere. This racism harkened back to the days of Emmett Till and Jim Crow laws. It made for a convenient scapegoat and gave the media and the public something to focus on as David and Susan Smith appeared repeatedly over the next 9 days on national TV. They begged and cried for their kids' safe return, Susan saying how much she loved them and couldn't wait for them to return home. Police and volunteers across the nation spent countless hours searching for Susan's car and her children. On the morning of October 26, the search for Susan's missing kids began. Wells contacted the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division to coordinate efforts to send divers to John D. Long Lake to search the waters. Throughout the day, a sled helicopter flew over the lake and the nearby Sumter National Forest with heat sensors in an effort to find the car or the children. Divers searched but did not find anything on the bottom of John D. Long Lake in the area they searched. Union County deputies and sled agents searched the area surrounding the lake, but despite all efforts, they came up empty. Sheriff Wells would arrange for a sketch artist to meet with Susan to obtain a better description and a drawing of the kidnapper. Susan described the man as around 40 years old, black and wearing a dark shirt, plaid jacket, jeans, and a dark knit cap. That afternoon, Margaret Frierson, executive director of the South Carolina chapter of the Adam Walsh Center, talked to Susan's sister-in-law, Wendy Vaughn, to offer help in the search for Michael and Alex. Frierson worked with SLED to obtain pictures of Michael and Alex in an effort to print flyers describing the missing boys. And in a strange twist, on October 31st, the Union County Sheriff's Office got a call from officers in Seattle, Washington, about a 14-month-old child matching the description of Alex. Officials said the child was abandoned by a man driving a car with South Carolina license plates outside a motel near Seattle. By 10 a.m., Seattle police would call back, confirming that it was in fact not Alex. While the nation focused on finding the kids, investigators in South Carolina grew suspicious. Parts of Susan's story didn't make sense and were starting to fall apart. The friend Susan claimed to be going to visit hadn't even been home that night. The streetlight Susan stopped at during the carjacking was set up to turn red only when other cars were coming. But Susan said there was no other cars that night, so it would have been damn near impossible for the light to have been red at the time. Susan would also go on to fail multiple polygraph tests when she was asked if she knew where her kids were. The FBI agent who administered the test also said she made fake sounds of crying with no tears in her eyes during the test. Police and volunteers searched along 49 but could find no trace of the car or the boys. Police went door to door asking neighbors for information, and during a search of the Smith family home, investigators would find a letter from Tom Findlay, who Susan had been having an affair with, breaking off the relationship because of the kids. The letter was dated 8 days before the boys disappeared. Just hours after Susan and David appeared on a morning show begging for the boys' safe return, Susan would be confronted by investigators. She would break down and confess to drowning the boys by releasing the brake and pushing her car into John D. Long Lake. Within hours, divers would recover the car and the bodies of the little boys still trapped in the rear seat. Union County Sheriff Howard Wells held a press conference that night to inform the nation that Susan Smith was arrested and charged with the murder of her boys. The compassion the nation once felt for Susan turned to hatred. She would become the most hated woman in America. In January 1995, a young up-and-coming prosecutor, Tommy Pope, said he would push for the death penalty in the upcoming trial. In July, jury selection would start, with 9 men and 3 women being selected. Susan would be represented by David Brooke and Judy Clark. Judy would also go on to represent other high-profile shitheads like the Unabomber and the Boston Marathon bomber. On July 18th, the opening day of the trial, Tommy Pope would open up with the carjacking was just a lie to cover up the murder because the kids were an obstacle to an affair she was having, an inconvenience that needed to be removed. The defense, with David Brooke taking lead, took the stance that this had been a botched suicide attempt by an unstable woman after being rejected. As the trial progressed, the courtroom was brought to tears as diver Steve Morrow took the stand. Steve was one of the divers who discovered Susan's car submerged in the lake. He testified that as he got closer, he could see one small hand pressed against the window, and as he got closer, he could determine the boys were still in their car seats, floating upside down in the car. In her confession, Susan mentioned an affair with a man she loved deeply, but he did not love her back. This man would be Tom Findlay, who would take the stand and share details of their relationship. He admitted to seeing Susan 3 times on the day of the murder and that she was extremely despondent. Prosecution pushed that this was from Findlay's decision to end the affair, and this is what pushed Susan to murder. Pope entered into evidence a letter from Tom to Susan that was recovered from the car. In it, he expressed that the children were the contributing factor in the breakup and that he did not want children in his life. Tom would go on under cross-examination to speak compassionately about Susan, saying they had remained friends after the breakup and that the main cause was him catching Susan kissing another man at a party. The defense used Susan's upbringing as part of their defense, bringing in witnesses to testify how Susan had been groomed and molested by her stepfather. They wanted to show that childhood sexual abuse can have negative effects on a person later in life. They were trying to make the case that this was a failed suicide attempt, that Susan had left the car at the last minute, leaving her vulnerable children to die as the car sank into the lake. However, investigators ran tests, meaning they shoved a similar car into the lake which had cameras inside it. They wanted to see if there would have been a chance to save the boys if she had changed her mind. The test would show the car floated on the surface for nearly 6 minutes before sinking to the bottom. There was plenty of time to rescue those kids or make an attempt. This bitch chose not to. It would take the jury only 2.5 hours to reach a verdict. Guilty. During the penalty phase of the trial, The defense focused on Susan's early years. They brought out how after her father's suicide, she had been groomed and entered a sexual relationship with her stepfather that had continued even after she had gotten married and had kids. Her stepfather, Beverly Russell, would take the stand to plead for her life. He sobbed as he read a letter he had written to Susan while she was in jail. In it, he talks about how he shares in the guilt of the tragedy and that his heart breaks for what he had done to her. Boo fucking who. He should be in prison with her. The jury decided her past had influenced her actions and opted not to pursue the death sentence. Instead, they gave her a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 30 years. So what did this worthless bitch do in prison? Did she sit in remorse and think about everything she'd done? No, this bitch did not. She began her life sentence at the Camille Griffin Graham Correctional Institute in Columbia, South Carolina. While there, she received 2 infractions for having sex with prison guards. The incidents were discovered in 2000 when she was 28. The first time was with a 50-year-old prison guard named Houston Cagle. They had sex on at least 4 separate occasions. An investigator discovered the affair while looking into tabloid claims that she had been beaten. Cagle pled guilty and was fired. He would go on to spend 3 months in jail, and Smith was disciplined. In September of 2000, a prison captain named Alfred Rowe was also arrested for having sex with her. Their encounter came to light after she told investigators she had sex with him, and he confessed. A year later, Rowe pleaded guilty and received 5 years probation. As a result of the sexual infractions, Smith was transferred to the Leith Correctional Institute in Greenwood, South Carolina. Prison guards would take special precautions with her in light of her past, never allowing her to be alone with one of them and often transporting extra prisoners with her. Susan's disciplinary issues continued at Leith Correctional Institute. Records would show she was disciplined at least 5 times between 2010 and 2017 for infractions including self-mutilation, drug use, and possession of marijuana. Punishment for her infractions involved the loss of violation. Punishment for her infractions involved the loss of visitation, canteen, and telephone privileges. She was disciplined on drug charges twice in 2010 and once in 2015, and lost privileges for more than a year as a result. Rowe, one of the prison guards who had sex with Smith, claimed that her drug use escalated when she was transferred to Leith. Christy Smith, Susan's former cellmate, revealed that her main purpose was to bring her pills. I've seen Susan do everything, she alleged. In reference to Susan's drug use, snort, booty bump, swallow, shoot, I've seen her do it all. So basically, no one would fuck her anymore, so she turned to drugs. Fucking useless bitch. In March 2022, it was revealed she had been sending romantic correspondence to a man outside of the jail for over a year. The long-distance romance began after the man, who was divorced in his mid-40s and had 2 adult children, saw a documentary about Susan on television. He wrote her a letter, and their correspondence eventually grew to a few letters per week. They write letters all the time, a family member would say in an interview. Handwritten letters about what their future will be. She's very romantic like that, always wanting to find a happily ever after. You know, 'cause she fucking deserves one. Susan wrote about wanting to start fresh with her boyfriend if she were ever freed from jail. We're going to have amazing chemistry in person, she wrote in one letter. I can't wait to build a life with you. Leave the past mistakes behind and start fresh. Just you and me. You dumb cunt, that past mistake was your fucking kids. A relative of Smith said in an interview that the couple were even discussing marriage if she got paroled in 2024. She's imagining the normalcy of a married life, the relative said. She wants everything in life that she believes has passed her by. So yeah, she is talking marriage with him and thinking that she can spend the last part of her life as a wife and stepmother. You dumb cunt. You were married. You had the normal life. You threw it away just like you threw away your kids. By October 2022, however, the relationship had fizzled out and they were no longer corresponding. Susan was reportedly focused on turning around her behavior in prison with the hopes of being granted parole in November of this year. Or last year if this comes out after the new year. A prison source who had known Smith for several years said in 2020 that Smith was following prison rules to help better her chances at release. She's behaving herself these days, the source said. She knows that her parole date is 4 years away and she can't get parole if she isn't being good. However, Susan's disciplinary history, which includes her infractions for drug use, self-mutilation, and sexual contact with a guard, would all factor into the parole board's decision. Ultimately, she was denied parole, despite telling the board at her hearing that she knows what I did was horrible. Yeah, no shit. She would also say, I am a Christian and God is a big part of my life. And I know He has forgiven me. And I know that it is by His grace and mercy. And I just ask that you show that same kind of mercy as well, she said. And that shit right there annoys the hell out of me. Some narcissistic fuck pulling the God said this and that, so you should listen. Fuck that. Take your imaginary friend bullshit and piss off, you dumb bitch. Also, during her first attempted parole hearing, David Smith, her former husband, would speak out saying, I'm not here to speak about what she's done in prison. I'm just here to advocate on Michael and Alex's behalf and as their father. David said he questioned whether he could go on after Susan killed their sons. What she did, not only to Michael and Alex, she came pretty close to causing me to end my life because of the grief she brought upon me, David said. Susan Smith's attorney, Tommy A. Thomas, and what a fucking name that is, did not respond to a request for comment before or after Wednesday's parole hearing. He told the board his client was truly remorseful. Susan's chances for parole were already unlikely, as research shows the main factor influencing parole decisions is the presence of a victim or the victim's family. Her disciplinary record and the media attention involved also likely played a role in the outcome. But the presence of her former husband and 14 witnesses at the hearing who opposed Susan Smith's parole made her chances next to none. David, who has refused to see Susan since she confessed, has stated that he will be back every 2 years to make sure she does not get out. As of the first week of November, the Office of Victim Services had received at least 360 letters, emails, and messages about Smith's parole hearing, with all but 6 opposing granting her parole, the department said. Parole is granted only for violent offenders about 8% of the time, according to the South Carolina Department of Probation, Parole, and Pardon Services. And that was a horrible double murder committed by a lying cunt. Thanks for listening, and don't forget to leave a rating and review on your app of choice. And as always, you can send questions or comments via historiesofdisaster@gmail.com, or you can check out the Facebook page. One of these days, I'll get around to setting up an Instagram too. Thanks and goodbye.